Hello, everyone, and welcome to Houston Techfest 2020, the virtual edition. Before we get started, I want to make you aware of a feature in the presentation that will make this session more interactive. Please make note of the question mark on your presentation screen. When you click that icon, it'll open the Q&A feature, which will allow you to send me, the moderator, questions to be delivered to our presenter at the end of their presentation. So please feel free to post at any time during the session. We're also excited to let you know that Code Mag is giving everyone a free subscription to Houston Tech Fest attendees. You will be emailed a link after the event. We are proud to present Christina Assaf at HR Tact, who will be sharing a presentation on organizational trauma. Thank you, Christina, and take it away.
Great. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. No problem. I answer to all variations of it. Thank you so much. I greatly appreciate it. So welcome, everyone. My name is Christine Assaf, and today we're going to be talking about organizational trauma, and particularly how organizational trauma is affecting you and your employees. And on the screen, you'll see post-COVID-19. That's not to say at all that we are done with all of this, but obviously how organizational trauma is affecting us right now with the pandemic. And then in addition to that, we're going to talk a little bit about just not the pandemic, but just the state of the world this year 2020, and a little bit about mental health and how to support mental health for yourself as well as for your team and your employees and your whole organization. Okay, so a little bit about me first. My name again, Christine Assaf. I am a people solutions consultant. You can find my website at hrtact.com, or you can find me on Twitter at hrtact. I am a content writer for various publications out there, and I have 15 years of HR experience and over 20 years of experience in training and presenting and facilitating and workshopping. I'm a frequent speaker in technical conferences like Houston Tech Fest, as well as SQL Saturdays all across the country. And my background is in business management and HR, like I previously mentioned, but I also am a current grad student in the field of industrial and organizational psychology. And if you don't know what that is the study of behaviors of individuals and groups of people in the workplace to be able to determine how those behaviors work with each other, improve performance, improve productivity. So just a little bit about me. I know IO in the SQL world is a little bit different than what IO is in the psychology world. So that's a little bit about me. So let's talk about organizational trauma. And first, we're going to start with just kind of defining what that is. So organizational trauma is when a group of collective events affect the organization in a harmful way. It can be a single devastating event, for example, something horrific like a workplace shooting, or it can be a series of small events like layoffs or a cascade of maybe poor performing quarters by the organization. It can be something that grows slowly or something that happens suddenly. And it can even be something that exists within the organization that gets worse and festers and creates a traumatic atmosphere as it goes on. Now, trauma is something that we normally respond to as a threat, right? It's a natural response to threat. As our human bodies are evolved to respond to threats as if we're being eaten by a man-eating tiger, right? So we recover very quickly from threats, and we create new procedures and new communications, and we try to be more productive and calmer. You know, and we react this way in a place of trying to create, immediacy and a need. And this is natural and normal. It's natural for us to react very quickly to take away the threat and create a sense of normalcy, right? But our nervous systems can only handle that stress, that pace of reaction all the time for so long. So our body begins to tire. And we adjust to the routine of what used to be something completely new and stressful, and now it becomes kind of old hat. And so what was once an emergency now becomes something of the past. And then that past can be filled with traumatic issues, concerns, feelings, and they just kind of permeate through the virtual walls of kind of your workplace. And it's important to understand that while individually, you, your coworkers, your employees may be dealing with some trauma, collectively, your organization is also recovering, right? So what we're really talking here about is your organization's complete, like, aggregate mental health, right? Now, as an HR professional, and as lots of leaders in lots of environments, we tend to kind of abdicate the responsibility of mental health to our EAP programs and to the therapists and to the benefits that we have that are a part of our employment. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's the right thing to do, right? When you're faced with trauma, when you're faced with stress, you should go do those things. However, in doing so, we may sometimes be kind of removing the care and concern that comes with talking about mental health and creating a culture of mental health within our walls in our teams. We lose the ability to openly discuss it and share it in those virtual hallways and show that we're an organization that cares and isn't afraid to talk about trauma, stress, and mental health. Part of trauma recovery is getting ourselves and our organization back to a place of mental safety. And so sometimes we need to make sure that we aren't just kind of, saying, oh, go talk to a therapist. That's not something that we deal with, and that's not something that we talk about together. If we do that, then we're not being able to kind of understand that it exists for all of us. But before we talk about how to help it, let's first talk about particularly how those stress or threat responses are really kind of affecting us right now. So I talked a little bit about kind of those, that we react to things in that kind of that man-eating tiger mode, right? And we react in 4 different ways, those stress or threat responses. And you've probably heard these before, right? The fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. All right, and I want to go over these in just a little bit more detail so you can be aware of some of the behavior that both you and your teams may be feeling, right? And again, this is the way our bodies react to immediate threat and immediate stress or fear, right? And we're just evolved this way. So those who tend to lean towards this fight response, they do so because they likely have been conditioned that power, right, is going to guarantee them security. That power is going to grant them psychological safety. Fight looks like self-preservation at all costs. It seems very explosive, and it can be outbursts of temper, aggression, demanding perfection, right? Demanding unreasonable perfection. And it can also be, that can make it, people feel like it's unfair, and that there's a lot of confrontation, right? And a lot of absolutism. You have to do it this way, right? A lot of authoritarian style in that fight response. Those who tend to lean towards flight responses to any stresses or threats, they do so because they feel like if they kind of obsess about it, that will help them to recover into that place of safety. So this looks like obsessive thinking or compulsive behavior, and it's feelings of panic or anxiety, rushing around, right, to kind of get things done, maybe even aimlessly, or feeling like they need to rush around, feeling like they have to do something, right? That's that flight response. Working too much, overworking, right? Worrying too much, and maybe just the inability to be able to sit still or to feel relaxed because they feel like they have to respond, they have to fly, right? Those who lean towards the freeze response do so because they've likely been conditioned that disassociating themselves from this will bring them back to a place of safety. So essentially apathy, right, will bring them back to a place of psychological safety. They find comfort in solitude. They tend to be distrustful of people when they're facing these stress or threat responses. They kind of become mentally frozen, right, and seem to kind of space out and kind of become a couch potato. They don't do the things that they used to do. They tend to not do things at all, right? The cognitive functioning is just not going. And they have difficulty taking action or making decisions, right? Now, those who lean towards fawning, if you don't know what fawning is, those people tend to lean towards this because they have been conditioned that accommodating others and being completely selfless will bring them back to a place of psychological safety, right? And perhaps even physical safety in these cases. They often find themselves in codependent personal relationships. And here we're concerned with the idea of codependent work relationships. Now that's a whole nother subject matter that I could talk about for hours, but there is such a thing as codependent work relationships. And it is a thing. But fawners seek safety by granting into the needs and demands of others, right? They unconsciously believe that in order to be given love and respect and worthiness and clout, they have to forfeit all their needs and all their preferences and all their boundaries. They have to say yes to everything and do everything because these behaviors are really people pleasing. They feel like they have to people please in order to get back to a place of psychological safety. They don't really say how they truly feel. They do work for others to the detriment of their own self. They're always saying yes. They're always flattering. They tend to avoid conflict. And they internally will feel taken advantage of, but very rarely will ever express that, right? And they're very concerned with fitting in, very, very concerned with being part of the group. And I like to point out that because fawners don't tend to take up space, they are the most likely to be abused and burnt out in the workplace, right? So these fawners that respond to the threat or stress response, they tend to be the ones that they don't speak up. And so they tend to be the ones that oftentimes get taken advantage of, okay? Now, one big note, just like personality tests, we cannot categorize human beings and put them into nice, neat little boxes, right? We don't work that way. We are more complicated and nuanced. So you may have identified either some employees, some coworkers, yourself, some areas where you feel like the stress response really identifies with you or with others. But as with everything, your mileage may vary, right? Based upon personal conditioning, the type of trauma that a person experiences, the threat, the nurturing that they've dealt with, present day situations, all of this, people react in different ways. And I like to think of these categories as guides to help you identify behaviors, but not like personality monikers, right? This isn't like, this is my personality. This is just something that people tend to do. Now, again, I go back to, we have a tendency to abdicate the responsibility of mental health, but it's important for us to recognize these stress or threat responses. So let's talk about particularly how this COVID and what's going on in the current contentious climate of the United States with the, racial injustices that we're seeing, as well as, climate issues that we're seeing, the political atmosphere that we're in, as well as this pandemic. Let's talk a little bit about that. So dealing with all of it is very unique. And here's some areas where it may be affecting your organization. So first is that layoffs. People are scared that they're going to be next. There's a little bit of survivor syndrome that might be happening for those who are still there. People thinking, well, Sally was fired, but I wasn't. Sally was here longer than I was. I feel bad for Sally. She was my friend and now she can't find a job. Feeling a little guilt and shame in that, maybe I'm not worthy to have stayed and I don't understand why I was picked, that kind of thing. Also, the pandemic in general, as well as the news that's going on, all of the news overload that's happening. We're angry at the state of the world. We're angry at the government. We're angry at people. We're just angry. And the news cycle is moving so fast that anger is just inside of us. And again, when we face stress, that anger that's coming at us and this stress that happens, we can react in all these different ways depending upon mood, feeling, whatever. And so that can affect us and what we're doing in work. Also, let's just talk about the reality of that we're seeing these deaths that are constantly happening, either internally or externally. It may be happening in our own families. It may be happening in our coworkers' families, in our organizations. It could, or just the climbing totals, being able to just, see this happening every day and realizing that, this is happening every day. And there's some grief that we have to go through and that maybe our coworkers are going through, a little bit of depression that we're all facing, having to see this happening and watching it in real time, okay? Now, of course, we're all facing the economic stress of this. There's anxiety over job losses, anxiety over what's going to happen. People's own personal lives are being affected. Financial issues, right? Because the business might not be making as much money as it used to in the past. And people are having to hold off on doing the things that they wanted to do, buying a new house, going on vacation, going back to school. They're holding off on all of these things because, maybe it's just not the financial time or, hey, I don't want to do that right now, not during a pandemic. I can't even mention to you how many times I said not during a pandemic. So the idea is that there's a lot of grief that's happening with that. There's a lot of stress that we're feeling when we're dealing with these things. In addition, there's a lot of workers that are essential. We keep hearing this term essential workers. And the problem is that, you might be playing support or you may be an essential worker yourself who is on the front lines of this, having to put your body and life maybe on the line. And there's a lot of people who are feeling, do they even care about me, right? Am I essential or am I sacrificial, right? Here I am putting myself on the line. Am I making enough money for this? Are they caring about my safety for this? Do I have the PPE requirements? And you might just be witnessing this, and it's affecting us, right? Partners that we work with, vendors, people who come and clean your offices, who have to come and do that kind of thing. A safety compliance for essential workers, having those masks and everything like that. We're a lot of people who are like, getting our lattes at Starbucks, they're having to spray and sanitize, and they're having to tell customers who come in who don't want to wear a mask, no, you have to get out, and that's additional stress. And so we're seeing this stress play out in these organizations, just large scale, a lot more stress facing our employees, especially those essential workers. And then we're having disconnection and loneliness. About a fourth of the workforce, if not 1/5 of the workforce, is working from home. And so there's a disconnection and loneliness that we're all feeling, not to mention the fact that even if we're not working from home, we can't really hang out and go and do the fun things like go to festivals and, movies and all of those social functions that we used to be able to do. And a broad body of research links social isolation and loneliness to poor mental health, right? In fact, recent data shows that 47% of people have said that they're having negative mental health effects from worry, stress, as well as just not being able to have that social functioning, right? And those negative mental health effects can be particularly pronounced with people who already have risks of depression and suicidal thoughts. So if you're somebody who, or any of your coworkers, anybody that you work or live with, are already having those issues prior to this, they're enhanced right now, where they're feeling that disconnection and that loneliness. Another thing that's on top of that is the idea of the Brady Bunch, that Brady Bunch boxes that we're seeing right now, right? Where we have these Zoom calls and everybody's talking. And we have this thing called proprioception, right? Which is our ability as humans to see the unconscious and track of where people are. This is, the side eye view, right? That you have when you're in a party or when you're somewhere and you're talking to somebody, but you're aware of everything else going around you. Well, guess what? We were evolved to look and think that way, to know where everything else is, kind of unconsciously. We're not evolved to talk to Brady Bunch boxes, right? That is not our normal method of communication. And so that takes a lot of cognitive function. So that whole Zoom fatigue thing, it's a real thing. It's a real thing, and actually does happen. And we're using more brain power, trying to focus on all these different people in these different boxes in a way that we really have just not been able to do before. And so we're seeing a lot of that happen as well. And then compassion fatigue, stress from caring about other people, feeling like we're seeing people suffering. If you're in a situation where you support nurses and doctors and anything like that, there's a deep feeling of sympathy and empathy to the point of exhaustion sometimes, right? We're caring too much almost. A deep desire to want to alleviate the pain of others and the suffering, wanting to be able to get to that place of kind of that detached empathy. Again, I talked about that disassociation. Some people, it's affecting them that way, where they're so fatigued and caring that they just don't want to care about anything anymore at all. And so these are things that we're seeing, this research and science that's coming out right now about what's happening right now currently with organizational trauma and COVID and everything else. So let's talk a little bit about the impact that's having within your work groups and within your teams. So you may be facing silence and communication barriers, right? There's going to be some auditory processing issues, right? Staring at someone for like a good 10 seconds after they speak, and you're just trying to kind of decipher, and your brain is trying to make sense of what they said, and maybe you're missing out on what someone said, and they said it multiple times, and even though you could hear them perfectly well, for some reason you're having problems, separating the conversation and the background noise, right? It's sort of like there's a television on in the back room and it's just kind of like playing static, right? Or maybe like you can't finish your sentences, you kind of get distracted all the time, and especially again, Zoom calls, we're multitasking, things like that. Our brains are just kind of foggy, right? So we're facing a lot of those communication barriers. Increased misunderstandings. Some of our communication channels that we're using email, we're using Slack channels, Teams channels, things like that. So we're finding, sarcasm and tone of voice and verbals and nonverbal communications. We're missing all of those unless we're on video calls, but we don't want to be on video calls because they cause us fatigue. So all of these increased misunderstandings are just happening. And then maybe even just exhaustion from having to over communicate, right? Because now we have to over communicate to make exceptions for the fact that we aren't in the same rooms together anymore. And that can be difficult too, all right? And then we're seeing a lot of breaking trust and paranoia. You may see that. That might be impacting you in your hallways, right? Some insecurity, doubt of your own abilities, or your colleagues are having doubt of their own abilities. Thinking that people really don't like us, maybe, this kind of like childhood, 8th grade, middle school. Are they talking about me? I think they're talking about me. Was that a snipe at me? Were they being passive aggressive? That paranoia is going to emerge. And that's just, again, that fight, flight, or response. That's a reaction to stress and to trauma. And past traumas are going to come in, right? Experiences of failure and rejection, loneliness, social anxiety, negative beliefs about yourself. Perfectionism, things like that. In a connection vacuum, which is what we're in, right? In that vacuum where we don't feel like we're connected with others, we're going to invent our own version of social interactions. And so, to put simply, when we feel threatened, when we're triggered by stress and trauma, we tend to think everyone is out to get us, right? And so then that's where this paranoia and this trust breaking starts to happen. We're also seeing impacts, and you're going to see impacts on executive dysfunction and low productivity. Executive dysfunction, if you don't know that term, I like to think of it as kind of the human version of buffering. It's when you sit there and you think, I need to get up and I need to do the dishes. And then you sit there and you sit there and you sit there and you think over and over, I should get up and go do the dishes. And you think as hard as you can, but you just don't. Just your body and doesn't listen. It's like a slow computer over and over and over, like on the load page, just like failing, right? And it's not laziness. It's a mental health symptom, right? And I love this tweet that I saw that talks about how our brains are like opening the task manager on your computer and finding that there's something else that's running in the background that's just taking up all your processing power, right? And it's essentially something that we're all facing, just a lot of cognitive overload to this whole situation. And so we're feeling like we're doing more than we have been before, but maybe we're not. We just feel like we are, right? On the contrary, we may be overfunctioning, right? Being overproductive, doing more than necessary to distract or to make up or feeling for that survivor syndrome or from a heightened place of anxiety. To cancel overfunctioning, we need to learn to say no. And if you are a leader or a team leader, you need to learn to be okay to be told no. Right? And to emphasize to your employees and your colleagues and your team who you may see these symptoms of overfunctioning, to tell them it's okay to say no to me, or to ask them, hey, if you feel like this is overload, it's okay to say no, right? And be aware of them taking on too much and you see I'm going to collect and do more and do more and do more again, mental health system of stress and threat, okay? And then also, you may be seeing some impact of victimization and a lack of empowerment, feeling like they're not involved in all the decisions, they have lower self-esteem, there's a lack of optimism, they're very pessimistic now, feeling that nothing makes a difference. Nothing makes a difference, everything is bad, everything's horrible, right? And not confident in leadership. They may be talking down leadership, talking down to, about what's going on, and feeling like they can do nothing to help. Right? Or you may feel like that, feeling like nothing's going to help, right? So these are the impacts that can manifest and it can happen in your workplace, all right? So let's talk about some of the symptoms that you might be seeing and how these might be seeing like actual behaviors that you might be seeing and indicated in the work. First off, in work behaviors, you may see things like not showing up on time for meetings or at all, right? And something that might not be typical for that particular person. Expressing a desire to quit or to move on from the job when that person has really never said that before, or if they have said it, it's kind of always been sarcastic, but now they're kind of saying it and it kind of doesn't seem sarcastic. And then sarcastic jokes that they're leaving, right? Lower performance, right? Just not meeting deadlines, not producing work like they had before. So you could definitely see some diminished performance in that work behavior. For social behaviors, you could see short emails, short responses, sarcasm in this, sarcasm in the emails, or emails being interpreted as sarcasm. Somebody saying, well, I hear this sounded sarcastic to me, when really it wasn't sarcastic at all. They're just maybe thinking that, again, that paranoia. Or being callous in their emails, some callousness there. Not showing up to any of the social events, Zoom socials or whatever the social events that you might have. And disassociation, that bell jar feeling, where you feel like somehow there's kind of a glass between you and everything and everyone else in the whole world. And it just takes a lot of effort to kind of engage with anything outside of yourself. It's not really a sad feeling in and of itself. It's just kind of like no flavor, right? It's just like you just feel blah all the time, and they feel blah all the time, and it's just exhausting, right? So you may be feeling some of that bell jar feeling. And then emotional behaviors that you might be seeing is they're not interested in hobbies that they once had before. They're angry, they're irritable, very easily triggered by something that's very seemingly small or insignificant. And they're unable to process emotions, right? Maybe not being able to process that well. And then also preoccupation with past events, like talking about traumatic events all the time, continually obsessing over those events, constantly referring to them and obsessing and wanting to talk about them all the time. And that means that they're still processing that stress and that traumatic events that have occurred to them. And these are all symptoms of anxiety and depression and mental health indicators. And so how can we support our employees during this trauma recovery? What are the things that we can do, right? That we have the power to control. So the first is reassurance, right? And the reassurance that you can give is you can give some reassurance on job security, right? The ability to say, hey, you're still here. As far as we know, we're all still here. As soon as that is going to change, I'm going to let you know as much as I possibly can. I'm going to be as transparent with you as I possibly can about what's going on. As well as physical safety, right? That is a big thing right now, being able to say, hey, we are going to give you the proper PPEs that you need. We're going to assure that things are wiped down. You do have the ability to work in a hybrid environment, or you have the ability to work from home if you don't feel like you need to. And then that safety of also, hey, I know you also have kids who are literally taking classes behind you during the time that some of your Zoom calls and some of your work is happening. It's okay if if you need to take a break for a second and go help your kid with a meltdown that they're having about this algebra equation that they have to do. Being able to reassure them that they're okay, right? Letting them know that they're safe, letting them know that it's okay to feel upset. And sharing with them how you deal with your own stress, right? Sharing with your coworkers, with your colleagues, with your team leads, things like that, so that we can create kind of that sense of team, right? And bonding on this whole thing. And then amplifying those positive and hopeful stories, of things that we have done, things that we're doing, giving us a sense of feeling of teamwork and team building. And then, just asking yourself, how can I make my employees feel a little safer? What are we certain of? What are the things that we can talk about? And then how can I spread those good vibes? How can I tell those good stories? Can we start a meeting with everybody, go around the room and talk about something great that happened today? Being able to get people to a positive feeling so that they can go throughout their day. Another thing is to build resiliency, and I'm a big fan of the resiliency idea. And education and practice on trauma and stressors and how to deal with them can help them to build that resiliency. So basically, teaching people exactly what I'm teaching you helps to build resiliency. So once you can identify where you are with your stress and where you face your stress, helps to be able to identify it, acknowledge it, and know where to go from there, right? But social support, just things like I'm here, we're here if you need anything, and a reminder of how they've overcome stress and bad times before and in the past. Reminders that these are setbacks and that they are impermanent, right? That is very important in this, being able to say that, hey, we're set back now, but things are going to get better, I promise. And then also, just lowering those expectations just a little bit, right? We don't have, maybe we don't necessarily have to be running 110% like we were when it wasn't a pandemic, when it wasn't a climate like what it's now. Maybe we can just, kind of ease off a little bit on those guidelines and those, performance expectations. I'm a big fan of increasing what we call micro confirmations, right? And those are strengths, telling people how well they're doing. You're doing great. Everything's going great. I really appreciate what you did there. This is great. Saying thank you and being grateful to yourself, to your colleagues, to everybody else around you a little bit more than what you normally would, so that people can feel that sense of safety, right? I'm feeling good. So micro confirmations, confirming that they're doing well. And then helping them focus on what they can control. So when anyone feels a little bit out of whack, you're talking or having any feedback discussions, whatever the case may be, being able to say, hey, I know you kind of feel all over the place. What are the things that we can control? What are the things that we can do? What can you accomplish just today, right? I'm a big fan of also telling them to take their to-do list and cut it in half, especially for those over functioners, right, who tend to react with, trying to get as much as they can done when they're stressed out, and that's their trauma response. Telling them, hey, I want you to just focus on 2 things you can get done today, not 10, right? So helping them out with that. I'm a big fan of the holistic mental health approach of BASE, which stands for body, achievement, connection, and enjoyment. There wouldn't be any good presentation without an acronym. You always have to have an acronym in presentations. It's just a presentation like 101. So this is your acronym for today. But it stands for BASE, and the first one is body, right? So encouraging both yourself and others to take care of your body, right? Healthy meals, showering, right? Exercising, going for walks, getting the sun on your shoulders, whatever the case may be, making sure that you're taking care of your body, because if we're working from home all the time and we're sitting in a chair for 8 to 12 hours a day, that's not healthy, right? The next is achievement. We all need to feel a sense of achievement in our daily life. And so, being able to say, what's one goal you can complete today? Again, cutting those to-do lists in half, so then they feel like they're achieving that to-do list better, instead of staring at something where they only marked off 1 when they wanted to do 10. Asking them how you can help them with keeping up with their regular routines. And I'm a big fan of the GROW method for feedback sessions. You can Google it and look it up, but being able to help them create small goals and help them thinking forward with that GROW method. And some directional leadership. Sometimes to get a place to safety, for some of us, we need a little bit more of a heavy hand, a little bit more direction, a little bit more authoritarian style. So if you're a anti-micromanager kind of leader in your teams, you might need to get a little bit more micromanagey for some of your employees, because they might need that in order to be able to process and get some things done, right? But like what I always say, for those that are kind of in that emotional state, maybe some gentle accountability, right? Gentle accountability. And then for C, that's connection, right? We need connection. We need social connection in our lives on a daily basis. And so that's like, company trivia, Zoom hangouts where we only, talk about our pets, call in, checking and calling in instead of having a Zoom phone call or whatever the case may be. And then just little check-ins where you have a weekly meeting where we talk about everything that's not work related. So then that way we can really create some social connections and social bonding between everybody so that we can better understand each other. Okay. And then the last one for E on the base here is enjoyment. Movie watching, listening to music before or after our Zoom phone calls so that everybody can kind of get into the groove. Dance-offs, right? And then one of my favorites that I heard from a company that they did a nostalgia day where everybody pulled up old pictures and told old stories of kind of the things of the past or where we were last year. Whatever the case may be, bringing us back to oh, this was great, and oh, you remember when this happened. And again, that creates that connection, but it allows us to enjoy each other's company. And we need that within our walls right now while we're trying to be able to work remotely in a lot of places. I'm a big fan of personally using and emphasizing and encouraging mindfulness techniques. There's so many out there, and you can Google mindfulness techniques until you're blue in the face. But some of my favorites are power poses. If you look up the book Presence by Amy Cuddy, she talks all about power poses. The big one is the Wonder Woman power pose. that there's research that shows that when we Wonder Woman power pose for at least a minute to 2 minutes per day, we actually get hormones released into our body that make us more confident and make us feel better. There's also grounding techniques that you can use for mindfulness. Those are very easy. You just close your eyes, sit in a chair, and then you just think about your 5 senses. What do I hear? What do I smell? What do I see? What do I touch? And you go through all of those, and it helps ground you. And especially if you're having an anxiety attack, things like that can help you to get centered back to where you need to be. There's breathing exercises too, meditations that you can do. You know, it's funny because I never used to be into that kind of thing, but most recently, especially due to the pandemic, I have become a huge fan of listening to the daily wellness little spots that they have on Spotify. You can find it. It's called Daily Wellness. And it's just a little mixture of music and meditation techniques, and they're very simple, and it's just a lot of breathing, but it can help to just kind of keep that, again, that cognitive overload, that task manager, that buffer that's running in the background, taking up space. It can help to quiet it down. And then also, one of my favorite techniques for helping with panic attacks, helping with overwhelming anxiety is called tapping, which is the EFT. And I'm going to give you a link to that at the end of this presentation. But tapping is where you tap on certain pressure points, one being your temple, forehead, top of the head. I think there's one here too, one on the side of the face, I think right here. And you're talking to yourself as you're tapping, and it's a way for you to be able to get that nervous anxiety. So while you're tapping, you're talking to yourself and you're talking through whatever the panic attack is. And there's different methods that you use for it, but personally speaking, I've used it many a time to get me through just areas where I'm feeling uncomfortable, and it really helps. Now, these are things you can use personally, but these are also things that you can practice with each other. I know that seems weird, but it works. And if we create an environment where we're doing and learning these together, then we can talk about them and we can create a better mental health and wellness for our entire employees. But it's also something that you can just deliver to your employees. Hey, I learned about this on Saturday. This was a really great thing. I just wanted to pass it on, right? And making people aware that that it's okay to feel these ways, right? Now, going along with that, being honest and more importantly, vulnerable is very important in supporting organizational trauma in your workforce. Transparency is vital for you and for your teams. So making room for the emotional expression, expressing and encouraging emotional expression within your hallways, within your Zoom meetings, clearly saying that it's okay to talk about feelings, right? And acknowledging them. And then giving clear communication and certainty on things that you can, but then also being able to say, I don't know where you can't. So when someone asks you the question of, you know, are there going to be more layoffs, or are there, you know, are we going to see a shutdown in this, or, you know, whatever the case may be, you know, are we ever going to open up? Being able to say and be vulnerable and say, I don't know, but we're trying to figure this out. As soon as I know and can make that information available to you, I will, right? Ask yourself, what can I control? What can I deliver? What is the information that I'm able to say? But being honest and vulnerable is very, very important for yourself and for your team. It creates bond and connection. A fellow IO psychologist and organizational development consultant, Jenna Pitzella, she says you can tell a culture by how much and how they are communicating. She says to turn away from the script, right? And open up to vulnerability. Right. And then Dr. Aiken, who is a fellow IO psychologist, and she teaches at the University of Maryland, she says that when we move towards a perfectionist attitude, that we're perfect and we know everything, we actually become less relatable. Right. So being vulnerable and showing that, hey, we're not perfect and we're not going to be perfect on this and we're going to make mistakes, giving permission to your employees, to your supervisors to make mistakes, as well as them giving you permission, right, is important in how we're supporting each other with our mental health. All right. Answer questions, share facts, share feelings as much as you're able to, over communicate to be able to give a sense of safety and to create a sense of safety for yourself and for others. And then, you know, the most important thing is to be a role model, right? Take breaks. Get plenty of sleep and exercise and eat well if you're a team lead. This is very important. But connect with your colleagues, connect with your supervisors, connect with everybody around you. The more we hide the feelings that we have, the more they're going to hang around, right? What we resist is going to persist, okay? And then faking it doesn't always work in these situations. This is not the time to muscle through, all right, and muscle up and just, clam up and get through it. But instead, this is the time to understand and to empathize and to share and to struggle as a team, right? And to encourage that both up and down, right? Okay, so lastly, I wanted to leave you with this wonderful quote and this wonderful message because I just feel like it's so potent. Dr. Mariposa, who is a UK psychiatrist, and she talks about public health talks about how during hurricanes, bamboo always seems to remain. And I deal with hurricanes a lot because I'm in southern Louisiana and we actually have a tropical storm named one coming, in like a week, I think, or this weekend. But when you see hurricanes and you go and see the devastation of them, the trees that are pulled up, the houses that are messed up, you end up seeing in the end that this bamboo stays. And that is because bamboo is flexible and it moves with the wind and it bends, but it never really breaks. And that's because bamboo has a very interesting root system, right? That allows it to be able to be rooted and to stay, but to bend with the storm, right? And that's why bamboo always stays after the storm. So what are the roots of you, of your organization? Where can you get planted and get rooted so that you can regain the balance that you need for yourself, for your teams, okay? And how can you be like bamboo to be flexible? Keep to those roots, but then be flexible to overcome the storm and this stuff that we're going through. Here are some resources that are available to you. We'll make these links and these slides available to you. Last thing I want to say is that if you are interested in hiring my services, please feel free to reach out to me via email or on my website to discuss what I can do for you or for your organization. I offer HR and IO psychology services. I have consulted with multiple businesses to help improve workplace behavior and ultimately to be able to help increase productivity for you and for your teams. So that all being said, I think now we'll take some questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Christine. There are a few questions that are in here. One I wanted to start off with, Tavonda actually just wanted to put in there that it was a great presentation, and thank you very much for the presentation. So I wanted to let you know that before we go. And actually, one of your previous slides kind of answers one of these next ones, but maybe you can give a little bit more info on how they can get to those resources, which is, what are some resources that companies can use to provide support to their employees?
Yeah, absolutely. And so that's the thing is, that could be a presentation within itself, because I know there are so many out there. A lot of the larger organizations, within their benefits are going to have those mental health and well-being benefits that exist within them. And so, reaching out to the HR departments, if you have one, or reaching out to your benefits and your wellness benefits itself to being able to say, hey, what do we have in the forms of mental health and well-being that's available already? A lot of times, and a lot of the work that I do is communicating that to employees over and over and over again to be able to say, hey, did you guys even know that you have this, right? To being able to say that, hey, we do have online capabilities. We do have apps for your phone. You do have, virtual therapy that you can do. These things exist. And it may be that you're not aware of them because you maybe just haven't known it because, hey, guess what? We hadn't needed it. Maybe we didn't feel like we needed it, but guess what? Maybe now we do. And I'm a big fan of, hey, everybody needs a therapist. We all got issues. But when it comes down to it, sometimes, we just might not be aware. And it's really just planting that seed, making sure that it's available, and being that parrot, talking about it over and over again. But I'm a big fan of various different apps, the Shine app, the Calm app, all those fun ones. If you have a code, if you have the ability to purchase that for your team and say, hey, everybody, I purchased a code, you get 30% off. If you want it, you can have it. And all you're doing is just allowing the availability for that to be there. And that's where I go back to the kind of the organizational level. It's not about, having to hammer people with, I want you to take care of your mental health all the time. It's about opening up these conversations in a way that we're not scared to talk about it, right? And we're not scared to touch on it in various ways, checking in. And that creates an environment, right? An environment of mental health and wellness. So then that way, whenever somebody does go, hey, you know what? Yeah, I am sensing indications that I am going down an anxiety rabbit hole and I need some help. And now I don't feel afraid to be able to identify it, acknowledge it, maybe talk about it, and then go get the help that I need for it, right? And you know, this is a problem in our nation, right? Period, right? Like we have this negative mental health and well-being kind of perception. But then also we can create an environment and a culture within our own organization that allows that to be spoken and talked about. So that's definitely true. But fun activities and team building and things like that. I mean, you know, again, I'd be happy for anybody if they want me to make a list, I'll make a list. But there's just so many out there. I've seen so many fun things. I like to read a lot of, you know, just articles that come out of like fun people doing, you know, just weird things. Like the pet Zoom call was, again, an organization where they were like, we decided to have a Zoom call and all we talked about was our pets, and our pets were only allowed on the call. Like, you know, like, so they put their dog in front of the camera, you know, and that's fun, you know, but allowing check-ins, and really honestly, the biggest and the best thing that you can possibly do is just asking, right? You know, how are you feeling today? You know, I haven't talked to you in a while. Let's check in. How's things going? How are your kids? How's your wife? You know, just things like that. And sometimes we tend to be productivity so much, and we've got a million things going on, and I get that. But if you're a lead and you're in a leadership position, or, you know, if you're just, you know, wanting to really be a person who's a champion of mental health and wellness in your organization, that's important. It's important to just ask, and that will get reflected and permeate through environments, and other people will ask others if we can kind of, you know, keep that ball rolling, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and so I mean, I think what we can also tell everybody is just direct some of those back to you, right? If they want a list of some activities,
yeah,
you can email Christine.
The previous slide that I had here, this previous slide does have some resources on it. Not many. Let's see. Yeah, I would say the one that's really good, the tapping solutions in there. I do have some managing stress and anxiety, some CDC stuff, but a lot of that is just references to a lot of what I've already got here. But what I would suggest is that, you know, for fun things and things like that, I would just look up, you know, supporting mental health in the workplace. So, you know, mental health, you know, wellness applications, things like that. There's a lot of kind of stuff out there. And SHRM is a good resource, Society for Human Resource Management. They're a really great resource if you just go to that website and look up like mental health, you know, and wellness activities and things like that. But if your company does have an HR department, reach out to them. They already know. They already know what it is. You know, they know. But if they don't, call your benefits, you know, call your insurance company and ask what they've got, because a lot of times there are those ancillary things that exist, and they can exist for you and for your, you know, for your team.
Yeah, thank you. We do have one last question, and you kind of hit on it a little bit, but this one is, it's how do we support our direct employees emotionally without training as a counselor? Yeah,
absolutely. And look, this is you know, you hit the nail on the head. This is the thing that I think that a lot of people fear, right? It's like well, I'm not a therapist. I'm not a licensed counselor, a social worker, so I shouldn't be talking. I shouldn't be, you know, directing my employees or supporting my employees emotional. And here's where I go with this. There's a big difference between, hey, let's talk about this childhood trauma that you faced and how we can get you out of it. That's not your job. That's not my job. We shouldn't be doing that, right? That's the no. But as team leads or as supervisors, there is an intersection between the emotional expression and the way that we're dealing with emotions and performance management, right? So if we're having a situation where we're having some performance management issues, or just something that we need to talk about, or a place that we want to get career development even, but we need to talk about that and maybe some personality issues, some emotional issues, those do intersect, because performance management is kind of a leader's job, right? And so unfortunately, when we're sitting down in that conversation, to say that we can't talk about emotion at all while we're in that performance management or that feedback session or whatever the case may be, that's impossible. It's impossible to not be able to address the emotions that are in the room when that happens, and to address, you know, emotional issues in that room. What we need to do is we need to learn ways to be able to talk about them, not as a counselor, not as a therapist, but in a way that makes sense. And what I say is that all people want to do is they want to know that they were heard, They want to know that they were acknowledged. And then they want you to be able to react to that in a way that makes sense, right? So being able to say, I hear that you're angry right now about what I'm asking you to do. I understand that this is out of your comfort zone. So let's talk about ways that we can make you more comfortable with this. What is it that we can do? Let's look into that, right? But I hear the anger that you've got right now. I understand that you're angry about that, and we can talk about that if you want to talk about that. There's nothing wrong with that, right? That's a discussion where we're not being a therapist, we're being a leader, but we're acknowledging those emotions and that they exist. We're not expecting them to be an automaton or a robot, right? So that's really where I come from this. Now, if we're faced with a situation where an employee comes to us and says, I'm getting a divorce, I have substance abuse issues, things like that, whatever the case may be, that, yeah, there's one thing of like, hey, okay, I am also your friend, and I also am a human being who cares about you. This is tough. This is really hard. This is not my place to say, let me help you out with your with this situation. That's more of the, let me help you out with the resources that I can get for you. Would you like me to talk to HR? Do you want to go to HR? Let's see who we can call. Let's see what we can do. And then what do you need from me as your leader, as your supervisor, as your team lead to be able to help you along with those resources? I can't do that for you, obviously, because I'm not, skilled in that, but I can help you with that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. We actually did have another question to come in. So It looks like we got a little bit more time. The post was, how do I express support for minorities in my company, especially regarding social justice, when I also have other employees who firmly believe against any such messaging?
Oh man, God. Okay, so I feel like that is an entire presentation that I could totally give. And actually, I do do a workshop that I have given to multiple organizations that's all about navigating tough conversations, and we talk specifically about diversity and inclusion issues, racial injustices, also political climate. It's hard not to talk about politics in the workplace at this point in time because it's so in our face, and things like that, and all these just different values-driven conversations that are really, really touchy subjects, right? We talk a lot about tools and tricks, how to navigate difficult conversations, which honestly just helps a leader in general, right? Getting more comfortable with that oogie feeling of, this is a tough conversation, right? And honestly, the only way to get better at it is to do it and to practice it. So this workshop is an active practice workshop. So if anybody's interested in that, I'll be more than happy to talk. But in the short time that we have left, being able to express support in that area, it's tough to ever say in what capacity, and context really matters, right? Context matters when we're talking about this. What I would always say is in all diversity and equity and inclusion efforts that we're doing, there's never a wrong time to stand up for what is right and what is true and what is real. When a joke and comment is being made, or when somebody is saying something that is inflammatory, negative, and absolutely against the values of our company, we should all want to speak up and in an eloquent and diplomatic and calm way, be able to express either a disagreement or support or whatever the case may be. But at the same time, if we're in an organization where we feel like either the leadership itself or our supervisors or whoever the case may be, we feel like there may be negative effects, right? We feel like we might get fired, or we might get a bad job performance, or we might get stuck with crap work, right? Because they don't like us because maybe we feel we're on different sides of, some discussion. I understand that. And that's where I'm a big fan of, unfortunately, that can sometimes be an organizational level issue, not necessarily a personal issue. I feel for this particular person who wants to express the support. But, having those conversations as an aside to that person in one-on-one isn't bad, but do it where it makes sense. And where we feel like we can really be able to support that without being able to feel like we're going to lose our jobs for something like that. Do it where it makes sense. But I'd have to know more context on that question. It's a difficult one to answer, but we could talk about that all day.
Awesome. Well, thank you. That was our last question. And I just wanted to say, thank you to everybody that is attending the session, as well as Christine, thank you for sharing with us. And today's recording is being recorded, and it will be available on Houston Techfest website. So I hope you guys all enjoy the rest of your day. And Christine, thank you for sharing.
Great. Thank you so much. This was wonderful.
See you guys.
Have a good one.